Another set of tools that we have to use is the unfold slash optimizing tools. So for instance, you can see I have this pipe right now, has a slight bend to it. So for example, if I go and click on these particular faces here and unwrap it, you can see that this particular UV shell is slightly wavy, but as we can see in the perspective view, doesn't really have any sort of distortion whatsoever. All the squares are in line and pretty much relatively decent. But if I do the same to this particular bend here, unwrap it, you can see that, yeah, there's quite a bit of distortion. You can see that some of the UV shells are overlapping, and you can see on the model as well, yeah, there's just really bad distortion all over the place. So rather than having to sort of manually move the UV points around, what we can do is we can use the optimize and or unfolding tools. So optimize kind of tries to make the best possible UV shape for you, and you can click it and you'll see that it'll try to keep unfolding it, and you can see that already it's made a much better impression. All that distortion is pretty much gone, although the squares are kind of at a slight angle, for instance, so maybe you might need to move it around. But then again, you can kind of see they're not all aligned appropriately. We could use the unfold tool, for instance, which tries to straighten it out as best as possible. And again, it's done a relatively decent job, but we can probably do one bit better. So for instance, I might just squash it down a little bit. And what I can use is, say, the straighten UVs, which will try to straighten out the UV shell as much as possible. So you can see right now, it's all straight, there's no kind of waves, for instance. I could do the same here as well if I wanted to, just kind of straighten out those UVs. But you can see that has caused a little bit of distortion to it, but not too much. And you can see here as well that the UVs and the squares are pretty much all intact. They're not kind of bending in different ways. They're all kind of relatively straight, and they're all flowing quite nicely. There's a slight bit of distortion, as you can see, but sometimes you're gonna kind of have to live with that. I'll probably still play around with it in order to kind of make it as square as possible, but it's a lot better than it was before. These tools are very useful for more sort of natural and organic stuff. So for instance, human beings or creatures, or for example trees. The optimizing and unfolding options are very good for that, because they kind of nicely lay out your UV shells in a way that which you can texture appropriately. And one last thing we'll look at is, for example, if you do have distortions in your model. So for instance, if I go to this little 3D model here, you can see that the squares are slightly distorted. Why? Well, that's because if we go to the UV shells right now, we can see that this particular shell and this one here doesn't really represent this shape quite well. As you can see that it has a bit of a arch to it, and these don't. So what we could do is we can go to UV and we can click the little UV points, which are brown, and what we can do is we can move them. So for instance, I can move these up to kind of get them relatively straight, like so. And I can do the same for the other side as well. Manually moving UV points is very important. Sometimes you may have to kind of go in and manually move them around in order to get the most proficient layout, and it is worth doing it sometimes as well. But you can also use the unfold optimizing tools to make sure that it is the best possible outline for your UV shells. So that's kind of like the main overview of some of the main tools you will be using in the UV editor. But I would say go around and play with it, experiment, see what works, what doesn't work. And again, you have all sorts of different options which are very useful to kind of play around with. Again, you need to be efficient with your spacing, but do play around and experiment with the different tool sets that you have here in the UV editor.